talk. So it was our commitment to have 4 monthly talks starting in May. So this is our last one. But of course, we may have some news for you soon. But before the news, we'll have this talk with Pamela, which is, I think it will be a wonderful opportunity to end it in high. Okay. So for those who don't know, IAF is the International Association of Facilitators. My name is Celeste. I'm the RD for Europe and Middle East. And Pamela was also one region. She was a regional director for IAF Europe as well back in 2009. So it's always a pleasure to have all these backups here. Today, Pamela is going to share us her stories about how to responding to clients, changing context and needs, and we are willing to learn from you and be inspired by you, Pamela. So it's your turn now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Celeste. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I was just having a chat with Celeste and René before we started, because I'm always sometimes a little bit confused by, or some people have different interpretations of what these events are for, these initiatives are for. And so I was saying, I want to get clarity on role before we start, because this is something you do every time I meet a client. We want to get real clarity on what the role is. So I'm making assumptions here, and I'm hoping your assumptions are the same as mine. So my assumption is that I'm invited here to share with you some of my experiences and my learnings. So I see this as facilitating learning to a degree. And so it's not in a neutral facilitation role in which everybody has an equal opportunity and right to intervene and to share their stories. And so I hope that its interpretation and that assumption sits with you. So I'll be sharing with you a couple of stories that I've experienced over the past, say, 18 months. They're not all COVID related, but the last couple obviously do go into that. But I'm sharing them with you because they've been really quite challenging experiences for me. I'm not sharing with you the ones that have gone really well. I'm sharing with you the ones that had warts and all, which really demanded a huge amount of effort from me and the partners I had at the time. And so I want to share those with you and link a little bit to the IAF competencies, because that's the framework that we all work from. And I hope have some opportunity throughout these next sort of 80 minutes, 90 minutes or so, for you to reflect a little bit on what those stories say to you about your experiences with the client and in a changing context and situation. So I hope that kind of sits well with you. I determined and I tried so hard, and I can't tell you how often I've tried to practice this over this week. I've even had a briefing with Martin Faller, who did the last one, to do it without slides. But one of my stories is a bit sort of convoluted and complex, and I thought you needed a visual representation to keep you on the roadmap. So this afternoon I've created some slides, and I'm going to share them with you as we go through the stories. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, if you look at the IAF competencies, you look for adaptability and flexibility. I think there's only one subcategory of behavioral indicator that actually says adapt to. But when you read them, and I'm going to quickly share them with you and just sort of run down the ones I've highlighted, pretty much every one of the 6 main competencies and their subsectors and the indicators refer to and expect a considerable amount of adaptability and flexibility. And I think you have to be ready for that, and you have to prepare yourself. Honestly, some of them some of the situations I was in, I could never prepared myself for because I didn't know they existed when I sort of met them. But to the extent that you can. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to quickly run through the highlights on the competencies that I saw that will be relevant for today. So it's on my desktop and I'm sharing, and I think you can see them here. I'm just going to run through. This is a document I use when I'm training. But if we look at starting from creative collaborative relationships, manage multi-sessions, and so you can contract for scope and deliverables, and sometimes they change and evolve. And so how are you assessing and evaluating how happy the client is, especially in a multi-series of facilitations, not just a one-off. Planning appropriate group, you arrange your physical space. So one of my stories has to do with how do you respond to space and the emotional and the physical when it's remote, because we're not in the room anymore. I've highlighted some of this here. You're active listening, but you don't just listen, you have to hear and then respond and demonstrate that ability to respond. Group creativity, how do you draw out those different thinkings, and how do you help the group understand, what different types of thinking and how that thinking affects the way that they are working and leading. So if you go through your own set of competencies and go through and highlight just how many of them, a variety of approaches to meet the group objectives, adapting processes, assessing and communicating progress, which changes and evolves, understanding, learning, thinking, distinguishing process from task and content. That is a really significant part of my story number one. And learning new processes, methods, and models. I don't know about you, but my learning curve right now is just exponential because I had no experience in a virtual context until this happened. And so I'm really having to learn just one step ahead of my clients all the way. So as you see, I've highlighted all the way through here. So you go back, I would suggest, after this session, and just go through some of those so you understand what masterful facilitation is expecting of you in terms of your adaptability. So now I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my slide deck, and I'm going to start with my first story. So I'm hoping you can all see. Somebody give me a hint, if obviously let me know if you're not seeing what I'm showing.
It's okay. Yeah.
It's coming? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my stories, I'm looking at adaptability as being the ability both to change or to be changed, to fit to altered circumstances. And so it's you adapting to that, but it might also be helping the other person to adapt. And in my first story, it's about a changing environment, it's about changing leadership, and it's even halfway through changing the client and sponsor. So the organization stayed the same, but the person with whom I had not just the negotiated contract, but the psychological contract with changed. So let me show that. I was invited to deliver a management program by a client and a colleague I'd known for many years, because they had an organization which had a long period of discontent, a toxic environment, and damning staff survey results. And so she came to me, she knew I was doing this in other organizations, and so I said I would do this. It was a client in Korea, and so I partnered with a good friend of mine and also ex-board member Rhonda Tranks in Australia. And so the two of us put together this proposal. And it was based on existing materials that I'd already delivered many times. And so there are some implications there on obviously the contractual situation, that I was going in with predetermined and pre-existing stuff. And we had this series of a hybrid program, which involved a learning component, a management program. It involved coaching for everyone afterwards. It involved action learning sets, which would be facilitated. And it involved 360-degree feedback at the end of it as an evaluation. So it was it was a big piece of work, huh? So it was premised on what I believe to be the stickiness for learning. If you're going into an organization, you need for it to be top down, to really be sticky. So we had designed this so that we would train, or we would facilitate a program with 25 senior leaders and then with 50 of the managers. So that was the intent, because we said this is best practice and this is how we'll get success. And we wanted to use the same program with both groups, but for the leadership program, we wanted to reflect on the kind of leadership culture that the SMT needed to create in order for the management culture to succeed. And so even though we were going in with the same sort of basic content framework and agenda, with the senior leadership, we'd intended to facilitate this. So that was the intent. So here's what happened. Here's the story. Remember, it was based on the staff survey, and we had an HR who was really compelled to honor the staff survey. So they were pushing and wanted this stuff to happen. But we had a void in leadership, and we had an acting leadership, which we weren't aware of when we went in. The executive director had resigned, and they were in the process of hiring another one, but they had an acting director. And in this void of leadership, there was an adversarial relationship that we weren't aware of between the senior management team and these interim leaders. So you can see, you can begin to see the complexity, can't you? So we planned the management workshops, the leadership one, and then the 2 management ones for the end of 2018, November. Actually, we planned them August, September, October, and we finally did them in November. But because the senior management team refused to accept, really own the problem, they wouldn't do the training. And in the absence of leadership, there was nobody there to say, do it. And so we had to do the management training first with the 50 managers. And we did it, and it was fabulous. But there was huge frustration on the part of the 50 managers and the rest of the staff who said, but hang on, this was really meant for the senior management team. What are you doing about this? So we had to go back and try to encourage and say, look, there's limited success possibility here unless we can get the SMT on board. How do you do that? So we briefed them, we met with them, we gave numerous iterations of an agenda which was supposed to be set. So we started to change that. And then we said, can we meet the new executive director? He came in. We couldn't get any face-to-face with them. We scheduled a meeting, the workshop for March of 2019. And at the last minute, the people who were the main problems in this whole story refused to be there. They always had some excuse for not being there. And because we still had this leadership vacuum, there was nobody to say, you have to do this. So the workshop was cancelled. So the first learning for me was, I didn't have a cancellation statement in my contract. I've never had one. I've worked for 20 years in this business, 15 years on my own, and I've never felt the need for a cancellation contract. I don't know about you guys. If you have them, write in the chat box if you have a cancellation contract and you always have one, or if you've had it just for specific situations, because I think it'd be interesting for other people to see. But I'd never, because I felt I had a psychological contract with all of my clients. And instead of a cancellation contract, I have a non-penalty clause for rescheduling. And I felt that was a more positive way of encouraging my clients to stay with the program. But here we were in March, canceled the program, so no work. And you can imagine it was in Korea, so I'd taken a chunk of time out. So it was too late because it was almost the week before, too late to get other work. So you got no income coming in that period. Plus we had limitations on travel expenses in the contract, and you couldn't get a business ticket to Korea for that. So we'd invested in our own, costs. So we were down $3,000 in flights. And so there we are. What do? Well, you try to encourage them to move on or to find the right decision for them in all of this chaos that they're living. So they said, look, everybody loved the management workshop. Why don't we run another? Because we've got a wait list. So we were able to run a management workshop in June and at least recoup what we'd lost in March. The new ED said, yes, we want to go ahead with leadership, but he wasn't present. And normally my principle is I need to speak with the highest level sponsor to move forward. We could not get face-to-face with this guy, even virtually. We could not. He was all over the planet, and it's in climate change, so you can imagine the concerns he had. But he came in, he restructured, he revised policies, he fired the HR person who'd hired us. And there was still this push for, yes, do a leadership program. Well, in all of this change, the senior management team said, hang on, we don't want a learning program. You know, we're too important for learning. We want a facilitated retreat to discuss the strategy retreat. So this is where it started getting interesting. You know, this is where you start saying, hang on, let's get clear on purpose here. Can we reevaluate the purpose? Is your purpose to do a learning program, or is your purpose to have a facilitated conversation around the substantive issues of a revised theory of change and a new strategy? Because that's a very different animal. And we found ourselves having to educate different parts of the organization to understand the implications of this saying, it's not a leadership program, it's a strategy retreat. And this was a constant, almost weekly conversation that we were having with different parties here to help them understand the difference between something that has a context, even if it's facilitated, and something which is substantive and work related, where we would be playing a totally neutral facilitation role. And we were getting pushback. So on the one side, HR and the senior leaders kept saying, these senior managers need to get this training, so sneak it in. But we'll do we'll tell them it's a strategic retreat. And I said, you can't do that. If it's a strategic retreat, we're dealing issues, and we can't be there in a different role. So that was kind of really a complex situation for us. And I'm wondering here, well, this is where we finally got the leadership model, but I'm just wondering here, let me just go here to this. If we could just do a quick sort of breakout here, Raina, and put people, I don't know how many we've got totally, but yeah, small breakouts, and literally a 7-minute discussion. If any insights you're having right now about this particular story, which I'm sorry it's convoluted, but it was a massively impactful story for us. And so I wanted to share it. If any of this is triggering insights about your past experiences in terms of renegotiating contracts and actual initiatives, and what it says about those past experiences, or what it might say about your future learning. So before you go into the breakout rooms, I know you have your phones there because some people will be naughty and we're multitasking. So take a picture of this question so you can take it into the breakout rooms with you. What insights has this particular story triggered about any past experiences you've had, or about any future learnings you might want to apply them to? So it's 7 minutes. So I'm relying on Raina. Can you do that? Can you put them
Yes,
into?
I am. Is it okay to have 3-4 people in one room?
That's brilliant.
Okay.
I'll just set my timer, but we'll have it there.
Oops, sorry.
And we won't have time to go around everybody and feedback because it's too many, but you might write in the chat box some of the sort of insights that people are sharing. And I think we could probably transcribe the chat box and let you have a copy of it.
Would you please now unshare your screen so that, yeah, I think it's better.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
See you.
See you.
Thank you, Pamela. It's very interesting, you taking a stance of a warts and all presentation. It makes it very real and experiential. So that's appreciated.
Thank you. Well, I can share some positive ones, but the positive ones, I don't think have quite the learning that warts and alls do.
That was 7 minutes.
Okay, great. So we're back. So yeah, if you want to write some of those things in the, I think we have too many people to go around the room and say, share with us. But I just wanted people to have the opportunity to share with each other what they're sort of seeing. I can see some people have cancellation contests, but I was just having conversation with John there about the fact was not so much the loss of earnings and that kind of stuff, but the amount of effort and energy that we both put in.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Negotiating with the client, and we had they had internal problems of, we had the contract with the technical client, but it was procurement who was really laying down the law and actually kicked back several of our invoices for work which we had negotiated with the client to do under the auspices of this contract was like $200,000. I mean, we're talking, you know, a big piece of work for us. And so we were being asked to adapt and to change and to redo agendas and redesign programs. And then when we sent the invoice for that work to procurement, procurement would say, but this doesn't match your original contract, so we can't pay this. And it needs to match. And I wanted at times to knock their heads together and say, can you please talk to each other? Because I should not be mediating between my client and procurement to get paid for this. You know, you've contracted me and in good faith. And it got quite hot and heated at times. And we had to use all the diplomacy we could to be able to explain to them the implications of their changes on the amount of work that we were doing throughout the year. And that was a really, really tough challenge to have. And it went on for quite a while. I want to continue the story because it's the backdrop to the next one, which is really a nicer story in a way. Same client, but it wasn't all bad. So let me share with you my screen again. Here. So I'm hoping, yeah, we're still there. So these were some of the things that for us were critical. We had to consistently be flex to adapt agendas and renegotiate initiatives, both on the content and on the business part and on the process in which this was happening, to try to advise the client on the best way to move forward in this very uncertain and ambiguous situation they had. And we had to constantly have them clarify purpose and outcome. Those two things, as you all know as facilitators, are critical. Why are we doing this? What do you want to do? So when they suddenly change and say, we want a facilitated strategic retreat rather than a leadership retreat, there's a very different purpose in that. And the outcome is very different. And so the roles that we play are very different. And we had to continuously educate them about the implication of us adopting different roles. So we could play the neutral facilitator, helping them think through the strategy, or we could be learning facilitators, helping them with the leadership style or the leadership necessary to be able to support that strategy. And we were constantly vacillating between different players in this whole party to help them understand our role and to defend neutrality and the ethics of our situation. So that was kind of interesting as well. I'm just wondering, is there anything in the chat box there before I move on, Rena or Celeste?
Yeah, I think there are very good comments about how important it is to have a cancellation contract, which is legal to avoid any additional confrontation or even puts you in a silly position by using the word that David used. And also how still big corporations that look like they do things very legally and in a very supportive way, and then they do cancel. So yeah. Where's the respect here about the facilitator role? Yeah.
The other thing,
and sorry, and just there are some questions about the unintended consequences that Jan referred to, and I don't know if you can clarify.
The unintended
consequences.
Well, for me, the biggest unintended consequences for me were, on the quality of the program we were delivering, because we had a connection with these people. We trained 75 of their managers. We were working with many of them in a one-on-one coaching. We felt for them. We had a real relationship with many of them, and we were really concerned about them as individuals. And so we wanted to make this work even in this dysfunctional leadership context and void. And so there was that side. Sometimes, you know, we'd say, oh, throw my hands up, we wanted to have done with this. It's just more hard, you know, headaches than we want. But we had this relationship with the staff. But also equally, I was very concerned about my personal reputation, because I work for lots of other agencies who these people, you know, would know and were colleagues of. And I was concerned about the failure option. You know, you're not meeting the expectations of this huge project, because the goalposts kept shifting. So how can you be expected to get success or to achieve something when they keep moving the goalposts? So we finally did a strategic retreat for them in October. And I insisted that we have a face-to-face with the executive director. He literally flew in from the Climate Change Summit in New York. And I flew in from Geneva. And at 5:30 that evening, before the event, I got my first time in front of him. And I said this to him to his face. I mean, at this point, I was being quite direct. And I said, I'm not facilitating this unless you and I get some agreement about what it is you want and what success will look like. And if that doesn't happen, I'm on the next plane out of here.
Yeah.
And so we finally got some kind of agreement, but they still wanted this hybrid thing going on. You know, sneak in some of this if you can. I know they want to talk about the strategy, but the strategy is non-negotiable. They can't change the strategy. It's been approved by the board. And I said, but you need to tell them that. It's not for us to tell them that. We're not here standing as pseudo leaders. You know, you are the leadership of this organization. You need to tell them what is negotiable, what is non-negotiable. And then we will help you facilitate the kind of what leadership do they need to demonstrate in order to help you drive an inclusive, enabling and transformative culture that will help you with the climate change projects. And so we finally got some satisfaction. And actually it was a brilliant, I mean, I'm so surprised. It was a brilliant workshop, brilliant retreat. And at the end of it, the SMT said, we want the leadership training because we realize now we need it. Ta-da! So then we planned the leadership program. And it was for March 18th and 19th, 2020. Guess what happened? COVID. So the week we were planning to go to Korea, they said, we can't do it. But how people are all over the world, they've been to a board meeting, we can't do it. And so I had a cancellation clause, and they were committed to pay me regardless of the cancellation. And because I had this, they were really invested in trying to get some return on their investment. They didn't want to pay me $20,000 not to go to Korea. So they said, can you do it? And this leads me into my second story, which is actually a wonderful story. We said, okay, we will design a full 90-minute modular program based on the outcomes of the strategy and working towards that culture that you're wanting to work on. Inclusivity, enabling, transformative. And the first webinar, I wanted to use a psychometric instrument. I use them quite a bit, and I wanted to use team management systems, which I like a lot. I've used it for 25 years, but I normally use it in a room in a very somatic way, so that people can stand and physically look at each other and say, this is how close we are, this is how far we are, this is how we map out on a wheel, we're missing this bit. So they get a visceral sense. And of course, you couldn't do that as much. So I worked with the owners and I designed an interactive session. And because my participants were mainly very, their actual weakness was a strength here, they liked the data. So I was able to present to them all the data, and for them to see, they were very task biased. And we knew this coming from the survey. They were very task biased. to the exclusion of their emotional intelligence and their ability to relate to people. And this is what we wanted to show in the webinar, and we did, and they loved it. And so we said, right, webinar 2, we're going to say to them, what do you need to do in order to create change, to be more relationship focused, compassionate, and demonstrate to your people, you know, that you do care. So here we are, 18 of them in the room, 16 or 18, and we start the webinar, second one, saying, what have been your challenges this week? So we go around each of them and they say, 12 people infected with COVID, 6 people in hospital, 1 person in an induced coma with a very poor prognosis, and people spread around the world and stuck in Mexico, UK, France, Dubai, New Zealand, Mongolia, all over. Oof. I mean, I get goosebumps now just recalling the story. So you can imagine that there was this heavy just blanket on the room, on this virtual room. So I'm going to ask you a question before I move on. If you're faced with that situation, in a virtual situation, I'm going to ask Renée to put you quickly back into those rooms if you can. What do you need to do, and how do you think you'll do it? So you're faced with that scenario, 12 people infected, 6 people in hospital, 1 person probably dying, people stuck all over the planet, and you're in a meeting that you didn't ask for. You're in a learning webinar that you really didn't want to be in. What do you need to do? How do you think you'll do it? Have a quick discussion, literally 3-4 minutes.
So,
Getting people back? Yeah.
Mute.
So, do we have everyone back? So I'm going to, forgive me, I can't have everybody feedback, but how about just here? I'm just getting a number out of the air. Who represents group 4? Do you want to tell us what you want to do and how you might do it? Do we have a representative from group 4?
I didn't pay any attention to the group number.
Renée, you don't have the list? Anybody know which group they were in? Group 4 or group 8? Anybody know who group 8 was in group 8?
Group 4 had Banu, Camilla, John Philip Green, and Kamal Deep.
Okay. John Philip Green, you're up.
I can speak on behalf of the group. We were kind of slightly concerned about were we with the participants or were we looking at the problem to be addressed. So we came to a consensus that perhaps we were looking at the participants who are facing those issues with respect to their teams. And the suggestion in the room was that probably we will explore what is the empathetic step that each of those heads took to, you know, while we may not have answers, what was that step they might have taken, and that could probably set the context for them to, you know, rather than the task-related approach, how about, you know, what are we doing for a people-related approach? And that itself might set the context for the rest of the session.
Okay.
That would be one thought.
Yeah. What about group 8? Do you know who you are, and can somebody speak on behalf of you?
I think room 8 was empty. We had room 9.
Oh,
If you
okay,
would.
go on for the 9.
Mark, Farah, or Abani.
Anybody want to give us some ideas of what you said? Okay, I'm gonna move on then, because the reality is, what I'm asking is, you're faced with this. I mean, you're not solving it. You're faced with these people who've just unpurged all of this emotional baggage, that they are there in front of you for a 90-minute session, a virtual, management learning session. You've designed an agenda and you have all your slide deck waiting, but you're faced with this emotional outpouring. So, the question is, what do you need to do, and how do you do it in a virtual situation? So that's the critical thing. Because if you've been in a room, I'm sure, like you, many of you, like me, if you hadn't already got a circle of chairs, you would have said, oh, come in, bring your chair, sit down, let's, and sat down with them and sort of talked it through. But our situation was, gosh, I mean, I looked at Rhonda, she looked at me, and you can't sort of go and hide behind a flip chart, go in the corridor and say, what do we do? How do we respond to this? Because you're right there in front of them, and everybody like you is facing you. And we knew that we couldn't just say, oh, right, hang on, let's show the first slide, because we want to have you talk about how you need to move from a task-oriented approach to an emotional one. Come on, they've just poured their heart out to you about 12 of their colleagues being ill, 6 of them hospitalized, and 1 near death. And that's what they're facing this week. So my first concern was, hell, is this where you want to be right now? In this 90-minute webinar, is this really where your headspace is? And so that's what I said to them. I said, hang on, let's not even load the slide deck. Let's forget this is a webinar. Let's reach out and deal with these people as hurting individuals. So I said, can I just hear from all of you? Is this really where you want to be? And so we went around each one of them, and everybody said that actually, yes, they wanted the opportunity to speak to their colleagues and to learn from them what was going on, what was happening. And so that was, once they decided to stay, then again, Rhonda and I kind of looked at each other, and we'd had our conversation out in the open, and we said, right, what we need to do then, we felt intuitively there were 2 things we needed to do. One was increase the intimacy and community of the group, because you're like you are right now. I mean, you're all over the screen, but you're all over the world. You're not really an intimate community yet. And so we wanted to try to increase that. And we wanted to get an appreciative inquiry, so that we could shift the energy from this negative energy into a bit more optimistic energy. So we very quickly said, we're going to put you into small groups. I think there were 16 or 18 of them. So we put them into 4 groups of about 4. And we asked, we want you to share with each other what you are doing right now that your staff appreciates. And so getting them into that appreciative, focusing on the positive, focusing on what they are doing well. And then we gave them, I think, 15 or 20 minutes. We handed it over to them because we could feel that they needed to offload. And so they had that conversation, then we pulled them back. And then one by one, we just had them share with each other, what are we doing? How are you handling it? What are you doing that your staff seem to appreciate? And they learned from each other, and they were able to question each other and ask each other. So how are you managing that? We have a meeting every Monday morning. We have one every, Friday morning. We have one in the middle, which is I reach out, or I speak to everybody every day, or whatever they were doing, they were able to share that with each other. And that was a much more powerful lesson, because it was based in reality than anything we could have said, which was about how do you need to shift your task-oriented focus to be a bit more relationship focused and personal focused. And so we were then able to talk about some of the things that they needed to do. and the more emotionally intelligent of them, the more social intelligent people in the group, three of the women actually stereotypically, were able to share some of the ways that they were reaching out to their staff and talk that through. And it was absolutely fabulous. And many of them reached out to us afterwards and said how appreciative they were of that, and then asked for additional coaching to help them through some of the individual conversations. And the chap who was had the person who was in a coma with his whole family also in hospital reached out to Rhonda, because Rhonda is a funeral celebrant, and so she was best positioned to be able to work through with this particular person how he was going to really script and role play with him some of those tough conversations he was going to have with the family, with the staff, and so it kind of worked out. But I tell you, at the end, the emotional energy, in the room about, gosh, dealing with that when you're so far away and you can't hug anybody and you can't go and, sit down with them, or let's stop and have a cup of tea. But trying to do that virtually was really quite a challenge. So I'm looking at there. I want to just respond to a couple of things people said about the last story. Somebody said, make sure that you have in the contract that you get phased payment. We had phased payment. There were 7 deliverables over the 12 months, and we were invoicing there. The problem was the deliverables were being changed. So what we were doing, because we were redesigning, rejigging things, didn't match the original request for proposal and contract, and so procurement were kicking back. So HR was saying to us, we want you to do this different work, but they weren't communicating that. And then there was another comment there about really getting clean on your psychological contract. And yeah, building the trust and everything is fabulous. But I don't know whether you noticed in my story, halfway through, when the new AD came in, he fired the director of HR. So the person with whom we had a psychological contract was no longer there. And so, it was tough to keep on saying, well, Amanda said, and Amanda agreed, and Amanda asked us, because Amanda was no longer in a position, she'd gone. And so we were having to renegotiate, on a completely different field, where a couple of new acting people weren't even aware of the conversations that we'd had before. So that was the other challenge that we'd had. It was a lovely, changing circus. Okay, so there are 2 of my stories, and I don't know about you, but in this the last one, in terms of the emotional impact, I'm facing that quite a bit with some of the teams I'm working with right now. And I just literally had a coaching session before I came on here with another manager who is working through the return, what we're calling the next normal, the new normal, the next normal. And I'm coaching 2 people right now who are, and then facilitating their teams about this return back to work. And in the best of interests, in the best of intentions, they're making plans for their team, but they're not including their teams. So even though they're doing the right thing, they then present the plans to the team. And of course, there's huge pushback and resistance. So the poor guy today was like, I did all this plan and it's how people are going to return. And then they kicked back and they said, we don't like this and we weren't consulted. And what I'm seeing happening, because people are in a crisis situation and are responding in a crisis way, they're making decisions for other people. And they think they're being inclusive, but actually they're being transparent. And this was a big insight for one of our senior management teams the other week, when they realized the difference between transparency and inclusivity. Transparency, I'm giving you all this information that you need and I'm being open with you, but it's top down. Inclusivity is going to them first and using a facilitative approach to get their ideas about how they see the return back. And the teams that are doing that and are talking through the return to work with their staff, and are saying, how do you want to handle the kitchen situation? How do you want to handle, you know, the office situation? And asking them, those teams are going out beyond to try to even exceed their managers' expectations. But where senior management are making those decisions themselves and then presenting it to the teams, I'm seeing a huge, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a huge kickback from them, because they want to be included. You know, this is their life, this is their health and their safety and their well-being and their family's well-being, and they want to be included about decisions that affect them. And so you have to encourage people to be inclusive about that. Okay, so I've one last story I can share. We have some time before we do sort of some takeaways, but you have a choice, and I don't know how we're going to do this, so give me a thumbs up about. I've two stories that happened to me just recently. One, I think we had somebody on the screen, she might have been here. I've just had a fabulous experience working with the Bahamas Red Cross Society to convert a conference they were going to have for the hurricane season. They have to do a disaster preparedness to be ready for the hurricanes, and hurricane season starts now. And they were going to bring everybody in. The Bahamas has 12 family islands, so they have, you know, representatives on these 12 inhabited islands, and they bring them in to do this discussion. And of course, COVID happened, so you can't bring everybody together, but the hurricanes are still coming, so you still have to prepare. And so we did I coached Margareta to design a really neat process where they did a virtual situation. So that was a story I was going to share with you. And then the other one is a not so nice story about a client at the last minute. I don't know if this has happened to you yet, changing the platform that you're going to work on. So you've designed everything for Zoom, and they suddenly say, you got to use Teams. And hands up if you've used Teams. Hands up around the screen. Hands up if you like Teams. Yeah, it just doesn't have the features. It doesn't have the eloquence and elegance of Zoom. I've learned a technical term. It's clunky, and you can find workarounds, but they really are clunky workarounds to make a very interactive thing that you've designed to work in Teams. So I don't know if we can get an idea of which of those stories will be interesting to share, because I don't have time, I don't think, for both of them. But
Pamela, before you move on, can I ask you to answer Joel's question? It's on the chat. He's asking, he's curious, how did he thought was being inclusive? Specifically, what was the perspective or words they shared regarding the past one?
Can you read that out to me again? I'm not sure I caught it.
Sure. How did they thought was being inclusive? Specifically, what was the perspective or words they shared for the previous case that you talked about?
They being inclusive, you mean how did the managers or the staff? The managers thought, I asked them, it arose because we did a facilitated session, and I asked the group, what could you do differently to increase or to improve inclusivity in your teams? Because some of the feedback that we'd gotten from that particular organization from staff was that they were micromanaged and that they were not enabled and they were not being included in decisions. So we asked the group, what could you do differently? And when they gave all their examples, they went off and talked about it and came back and reported back. They reported back the amount of communication, internal communication, official communication. They had crisis management teams that were reporting daily on travel restrictions, on health, on the situation in different countries, so the people had all that information. They were informing them about lockdowns and those kind of stuff. So they were informing them, and so the managers were using those information sessions or information vehicles, thinking that that was inclusive. But it's not inclusive. You're not getting people's inputs and concerns and ideas from up. It's fabulous best practice in terms of internal communication. So, you know, they were doing a really great job. They'd allocated crisis management teams. They had regular updates. They curated the information available for people to find easily. But they weren't going out and reaching and saying, how are you doing? What can we do for you? How do you envisage, you know, coming back into the office? What's your work situation like right now? Do you have everything that you need? Do you have all the material? Do you have the, you know, technical support? They weren't going out and asking. And it surprised me considerably that they believed that they were being inclusive when in fact they were being transparent in downward internal communication. Does that answer the question?
Yes, he says yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have a few votes for the Bahamas Red Cross case.
Okay.
So I wish we could proceed with that one.
All right. So I've worked with Margareta Otterson, who is the development delegate in the Bahamas on behalf of the Red Cross. For a couple of years now. We've worked together in a fabulous leadership program called Glow Red. You should check it out, which is trying to get more women into leadership positions into the Red Cross movement. And Margareta attended a webinar I did a few weeks ago, well, in May, I think it was, early May, on improving virtual meetings. And after she contacted me and she said, I have this situation, you know, we have to have this consultative process, but I can't begin to know how to do it. And so we scheduled an hour session and we started to plan, and I said, forget it's virtual. Let's just think first of all, what is it you want to accomplish with it? And so we mapped out, we said, right, we think we can do 4 sessions because time was also an issue. This was May and the hurricane season starts in June. So they have to have things ready by June. So they want, and these are all volunteers with other jobs. And so you got to do Saturdays, you know, or out of work time. So it was going to be 4 or 5 Saturdays. And so instead of having a big conference where you have all of these speakers come in and you have resource persons who want to tell them about disaster preparedness and volunteer management and community engagement and all these fabulous topics, we said, look, we've got to really streamline it down to what do these people from the Bahamas Red Cross need to know in order to make the decisions to create a plan for preparedness to be ready for the hurricane season. And so we storyboarded, and literally, I mean, I had, you know, I Post-its and we were sticking them on. And so I wasn't even using technology. We were just talking through and I was sticking the Post-its in and we were storyboarding the meetings and saying, this is what we want to accomplish. And then we took one of those and we said, right, let's look at how 90 minutes would work with one of these big topics. And we took volunteer management and we timed it out every 10 to 15 minutes to what would happen, what needed to happen. And then Margareta said, I've just got a new volunteering manager for IT. Let's bring him in. So I said, absolutely, because he can help us work out how to do this. Because my premise in designing for virtual is to work out what you want to do first, then find out how to do it, you know, and don't let the IT prevent you. Decide what you want to do, decide how you want to integrate people and how you want to have them interact, and then we'll work out how to do it. But don't be limited by the IT and say, oh, we can only do this. So we sat together and we said, right, we want them to assess volunteer management. So there are 10 principles. So how are we going to do that? And I'd suggested, I have a scaling exercise I use, and I'd been using annotation. So I wasn't using one of these whiteboard platforms or Mural or Miro. I was just simply using a slide and having people annotate where they were on a scale of 1 to 10. But they took that, Margareta and her colleagues did a fabulous job. They took that and they used Slido and they crunched the questions into Slido, and they had people upload the app onto their phones so that they could answer and rate themselves against the questions on Slido. And so what they did was every session they had, they made sure there was 10 or 15-minute max input from technical people, that they had an interactive session, you know, in group work to discuss where they were on the various topics for preparedness. They used a Slido in every session to either rate something or to answer questions. And then obviously there was work in between the sessions. So people went away, they had to go back to their offices and actually do some research about what prepositions goods do we have, where are they stored, do we have the people, do we have the right number of volunteers, have we trained the volunteers, what do we need to do to train the volunteers, how are we going to, and one session was completely on what do we do about COVID? When you're pulling people who are affected by disaster into one room or one place, how do you protect them? And so they had sessions on talking about that, and that was fabulous. And in the last session, what they did was they created a scenario, and they gave them an example of a hurricane situation happening, and they gave this scenario to different groups and said, analyze it according to, you know, your preposition goods, or analyze it according to your volunteers, and analyze the scenario so that they would get some experience in thinking through some of these issues and not just theoretically, because some of the people in the group were, you know, seasoned volunteers, but quite a few of them were brand new. And so they were new to the Red Cross, and they would be new to a response if and when it happens. And so you were teaching some people stuff, but you were also trying to gather the experience and information. And so they did, I think 4 or 5 sessions. And I had a debrief with Margareta just this week or last week. And I said to her, you know, how are you feeling? And she said, oh, I'm so glad it's over. But I said, what have you learned? And she said, I remember the slide you put up about prepare, prepare, prepare. She said, I never imagined how much preparation it took to be able to do this well. She said, and Margareta has been involved in conferences, she's been involved in regional conferences, she's been part of the planning process, she's been facilitating, she's done all kinds of stuff all around the world. But she said doing this and preparing for it to be as perfect as it was, as good as it was beyond what she'd ever thought was necessary. So, you know, preparing not only the technical, preparing people to get involved, training them on the system, having a tech jockey, they had Robin work, having a co-facilitator with Amanda, speaking to every one of the resource people to help them not to read their notes, but to have a conversation with people and make it animated, and keep everybody involved, to teach people how to use Slido, to teach people how to use the annotation. But they did all that preparation, and it just went superbly well. So, I mean, talk about adapting and learning. You know, we were learning as we went along, but then the Bahamas Red Cross did just a brilliant job. And I want them to share that experience, because I think, you know, it's a role model because every Red Cross society around the world has to do these disaster preparedness plans, no matter what disaster they're facing. You know, it could be earthquakes, it could be storms, it could be hurricanes, it could be, you know, whatever, floods, hurricanes, but they're all constantly doing this, and they can't just stop preparing because they can't get together. And so that was, it was just fabulous. And I'm just so proud of Margareta and her team for doing such a great job. So anybody else, any questions we have to? Oh.
So we have a comment from David. He says, don't try and modify the client's issue to justify the use of a particular tool, which I think it's quite interesting.
Sorry, say that again, David, I missed it.
Don't try and modify the client's issue to justify the use of a particular tool.
Don't try. I didn't have much choice here, because it's an international organization. The UN has just determined that nobody can use Zoom because of security issues, and they've all been recommended to use Teams. And so, you know, suddenly it's Teams, and you have to work from within their firewalls. So it was either, okay, I can't do this, or it was, okay, let me see how to do this.
No, it's no, I'm agreeing with you there, where you decide the problem first and then look at the tools, rather than saying how can I work with their problem in Zoom. And the the horrible reality is if it's Teams, it has to be Teams. That's the horrible reality. And
I resolved it. If anybody's interested, I worked with their IT people. I had them create mini meetings inside of the channel so that they could leave one meeting, go into a mini meeting, but then come back to the meeting. But they had to link. They had to link into the channel. And what I learned was they were nowhere near as expert in it as I was led to believe. So they didn't know how to do that. Some of them couldn't even find the chat box, you know, and I was told this was their work. They were using it. I used Mural instead of whiteboards and annotation, and I created the mural for them outside. And then I put the link to Mural in the chat box. I put the link to the rooms in chat box. But this was something I learned, and my husband, who uses it a lot for IT, just reconfirmed with me. I put everything on in the chat box at 10:55 for 11 o'clock meeting. People who came in late at 11:05 or 11:10 couldn't get access to those links in the chat box. Have you come across that? Doesn't happen in Zoom. But in Teams, if they come in later than you have put things in the chat box, they can't access them. Fortunately, I put all of my links in a document, a Word doc, and I have it on my desktop. So I was able to quickly open the document, copy the links, and then put them in the chat box again so that the latecomers could get access to what I was trying to do. But that was, you know, and that was learning on the fly, because I had no idea that was happening. When they said to me, we can't see the links, I was saying, well, of course the links are there. I mean, I've just put them in the chat. I can see them. Why can't you see them? But they didn't have access to them. That was interesting too. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know whether we wanted to, you either want to just have a free-for-all in terms of reflections or insights, or whether you want to go and have another quick discussion to, you know, to talk about what are your takeaways, and will it actually change anything that you're doing right now in terms of facilitation? What would it change?
Yes, I would support that suggestion, and I would open the conversation, because we still have 10-15 minutes that we can take advantage of. So if you guys have any comments, any sharings that you would like to do, please.
Absolutely.
I think the question about, you know, things changing and clauses for cancellations, you know, these things can happen. I think it's gaining respect and making it clear, as you mentioned earlier on, the investments that you are making. I think as facilitators, we are human people. We don't want to make life difficult for our clients, but the reality is, if you're working for large clients, they can just pay. They can afford to pay you for work not done, and that's no matter what they tell you, they have lots of money and they can pay you for work not completed and work not done. And I think it's about gaining respect for yourself, and if they don't pay you, they don't respect you. And I know it's easy to say, or sounds easy to say, but don't need clients like that. You know.
Yeah, you know, you don't. Yeah, I mean,
you know,
you have the choice of who you have clients with, but when things are changing after a certain situation and you've contracted and you have both a psychological and a physical contract that you think you're working to, and it changes because their context is changing. You know, they had a new ED coming in, they had new leadership, so changing things. And so I've always had the principle, David, that I want it to be easy to do business with, and I don't burn bridges, because in my world, everybody knows everybody else. And all of my work comes from recommendations. And it, you know, yes, we wanted to be, we were quite upfront, and we managed to get not only everything were owed in the contract, but we got 2 new contracts out of them to continue the work. And we're still now we're coaching everybody that was in that thing. So, you know, we managed to not only resolve the situation, but build on it. but you're up against, you're up against all kinds of power bases and authorities, especially in the bigger bureaucratic situations where they're so protective of their integrity that they don't want to shift at all. And you've got to, you know, you had this on this deliverable, you were going to have a meeting here, but instead of a meeting, you had a coaching session. Oh, well, we can't pay you for the coaching session because it says here it was a meeting. It was that kind of asinine interpretation, you know?
Yeah. We have a quick question here from Manfred, and he asks if you can share a bit about improving virtual meetings. I have designed programs on conducting effective meetings, and they would like to know if you have that experience, how to improve virtual meetings.
We just did a webinar, and actually we'll probably be doing another one. We're doing a webinar on 10 tips to improve your virtual meetings, and then I'm going to be doing another one on converting your face-to-face learning into virtual, because I've been doing that with a lot of clients right now because we are converting. So, you know, I'd be happy to send you a link and come to the next one. But it's all those things I've been saying now. It's staying true to your facilitator mapping and planning. The big thing that helped with the Bahamas was that with Margareta, we planned the key meta questions. You know, we said these are the four sessions. What are the meta questions that this series of meetings has to address, so we can create a meta model for the process. Now, usually you're doing a meta model for the one meeting, you know, you're doing the flow and you're getting it in there. But we, rather than try to create a meta model, I just wanted real clarity on the meta questions. And once we got the meta questions, then we could design and storyboard each of the webinar, each of the 90-minute session modules that she did, to be able to address that question. One major question. I can show it to you. Do I have a quick time? I can show it to you. Let me just quickly share my screen and I'll show you the meta questions. We did this. So the planning here, we started at the end. We articulated clearly the purpose. We discovered the level of knowledge and experience in the group to address the issues. We clarified exactly what knowledge would be required and the minimal entry level. And we made presenters had to brief to 10-15 minutes max. And we decided beforehand what kind of interventions we wanted people to engage in and how we wanted them to engage. And these were the meta questions that Margareta and I kind of crafted before. So how well prepared is the Bahamas Red Cross to respond to a hurricane disaster? So behind that is all sorts of what do they need to know about disaster preparedness? What do they need to know about all these things? But that was the question that one module had to address. The next question was, how do we strengthen volunteer management to optimize volunteer support? So that one meta question did help us storyboard that whole 90-minute session. How do we engage communities in preparing for and responding to an imminent hurricane? So that guided everything we did there. So nothing else was going to be in there unless it addressed that question. And what is our current response capacity and how will we fill the gaps? So once we got those meta questions really clear, then we had a nice framework in which we could storyboard the interaction and how people were going to respond to those questions. Any other questions before I hand over and finish? I'm just looking there. Is there anything else?
Yeah. So I think we now can say a big thank you, Pamela, for joining us and to give us so insight. It was quite an inspiring and insight session that we had today. And it's amazing how our experiences that are our experiences of normal business that we have can be so insightful, right? And for me, it was amazing to see how you put transparency and in the other side, you put inclusivity. And the words here were so powerful for me. So thank you very much, because that was my wow for this session. And I think I'm going to use it and steal it from you.
Steal it with pride, Celeste.
Okay, so yeah, this is the last talk that we committed to have with you, with all of you. It was a fantastic journey. Myself and Rena, we learned a lot how to create these and how to engage people and how to have people joining in. So it was a wonderful story for us. And I know that some of you have been here since the first one, others only one, others only two, but it was amazing to have you during these sessions. And before saying goodbye, let me share with you that we will be on summer vacations, myself and Rina, we deserve it. Okay, but you'll be getting from us an email asking for feedback, for some feedback about this experience of the facilitation talk. So it would be great if we could have your inputs and insights as well, because we are preparing some more surprises end of July and go into the summer. So thank you very much, and I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you.
And thanks to Rena and Celeste for organizing all of this. Super job.
It was amazing.
Super job.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Celeste.
you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great, really.
Thank you.
And have a great summer vacation. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Bye now. Bye, everyone.
Bye
Tchau,
bye.
João.
Bye.
Bye.